you have another nickname, which is the Queen of the Layoff.
I have been laid off 11 times in my career.
Layoffs. If that word is sending shivers down your spine, you're definitely not alone. Research suggests that nearly half of working Americans experience layoff anxiety. 40% of Americans will lose a job in their lifetime. This week on Leading Up the Work Shift, our guest can offer some hard-won advice to calm your nerves. She's been laid off not once, not twice, not even 3 times. Krista Chism has survived 11 layoffs. Oof. But she's landed on her feet, and I'm happy to say she's my colleague here at Udemy, leading our SEO strategy. Krista so graciously offered to open up her playbook to help anybody rebound after a layoff. I'm your host, Elizabeth Weingarten. Let's get into it. So, Krista, I'm sure everyone who's listening is wondering, what's the story behind those 11 layoffs?
Most of those layoffs were due to acquisition. I love building systems and programs, so that has led me to a place where I work for startups quite a bit. One of 2 things will happen with startups is they either get acquired or they go under. So both of which I've had that experience. There have been times in my career where I have made very earnest attempts to avoid working for companies that are startups, to hedge against a future layoff, and it still happened.
Are there any, without going through every single layoff in detail, are there 1 or 2 that you could talk through that are particularly notable?
So back in sort of the internet bubble, I call them the go-go days of the dot-com universe. I think in 2001, I was laid off 3 times over the course of a 12-month window. One of the jobs I had for exactly 92 days end to end. So on paper, I was probably a bad hire, right? They knew the company was collapsing when they extended me an offer. They probably shouldn't have done that. But that particular job was so special to me because within those 92 days, this particular company had a very, very strong culture, not unlike Udemy's culture. They made concerted efforts throughout the hiring process to hire people that not only were qualified to do the job, but were also just really strong cultural fits. And that job changed the entire landscape of my life. My friend circles 25 years later were born in those 92 days with coworkers. I started my own company at a certain point in my career. I leveraged the network that started in those 92 days. Not even 3 weeks ago, went to a reunion of that particular company that, for the record, only existed entirely for about 3 years. So that particular layoff for me was beyond influential in terms of my life and the type of connections that I made by choosing to work for a company that had such a strong culture.
I love that story because I think it's so counterintuitive for a lot of people. You think that you need to stay in a job for a certain amount of time, 2 years, 3 years, for it to really have an influence on your life, a positive influence, right? I want to go back, though, maybe even further than that, to the very first time you were laid off.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could talk us through what that was like, how that felt in that first time you were laid off.
I tell people this all the time, that the first layoff is devastating. If you are in a role that you enjoy and that you like doing, and you've basically chosen a career that you're happy with, there's no way not to take your first layoff extraordinarily personally. The interpretation of that is frequently, I wasn't contributing enough. Particularly when some people stayed and some people left, you compare yourself. Why did that person stay and I was let go? You interpret it as I was working really hard and you didn't recognize the value that I was adding to this company. You didn't give me notice. Now I'm left feeling like I am like staring down this empty space and I'm not sure what to do with myself. And you feel emotional around it. And the reason for that is what I have come to learn is that it's incredibly difficult to separate who you are and the job that you do for 8 hours a day and 40 hours a week. And so the first one, I cannot stress enough, is devastating across the board. The second one, also very, very difficult. By the third one, you start to understand the patterns that are existing. And I will be honest, by the 11th, you're like, here we are again. Give me my severance check. I gotta go, right? So it does get easier as you march through time. I would not wish 11 layoffs on anyone. I wouldn't wish multiple layoffs on anyone. But the first one, without question, is wholly devastating emotionally, for sure.
What really sticks out to me is what so many of us do, which is conflating who we are and the value that we have as humans with what we do and the value that we kind of bring in the workplace. And so I'm wondering, how have you learned to kind of separate Krista as a human out from the work that you do every day? And what has that been like for you?
There's really 2 points that I sort of was able to make a shift for myself. I didn't work for quite a stretch. 9/11 happened. So after the third layoff, then 9/11 happened. And so the economy was just struggling. So I had been already laid off 3 times, and the time it took me to find a new job was extended by nature of the world we were living in at the time. And that was the window of time where I really sat down and very consciously made decisions to define myself differently. Like I remember sitting with my journals and saying, if someone says to me, "Who are you, Krista?" I will have a laundry list of like 25 different things that I would want to be defined by. And at the very bottom is I'm a digital marketer who specializes in SEO. And once I started to understand that, and once I could kind of review that list in an ongoing basis to be like, I am a runner. I am a good girlfriend. I am a good daughter. I am a avid reader. I am a lover of music and live music and all these different things that I wanted to define myself by, and just putting my job at the bottom. And what that did for me is when I went into my next job, there was something somewhat broken. I just have never again had that connection to my job. So I think me maintaining ownership of how I define myself and being a digital marketer who specializes in SEO is just at the bottom of the list. And never losing sight of that has made things so much easier. Like I think layoff number 9 or 10, I was so mad. I was so mad that this was happening again. And I fired off this email to like every single person that I knew. And I was like, if anyone's keeping score, this is layoff number 10. And I had been blessed in that particular layoff with like a wonderful benefits and severance package. And I was like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go be a ski bum in Vail and teach little kids how to ski. And I'll figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life later. If anybody needs me, I'll be in Vail. And someone wrote back to that massive email and they said, okay, well, technically the snow's not falling. It's only October. We have a project I could really use your help with. Like, are you interested? And at the time I was so mad. Like I cannot stress how angry I was. And I was like, well, I mean, I'm not going to turn down free money that's landing in my lap. So I guess I'll do your project. And then that led to another project and that led to another project. And I wound up being self-employed for a while. So it's about how you define yourself and then how you react to it. It's like a 2-part process for that.
I especially want to underline what you're saying about really being the one to take ownership of who am I? I think what you're pointing to is you have the power and the agency to define yourself rather than letting a boss or an organization define yourself for you, or even the job market, right? To lead you to believe that you are or are not valuable, or that your identity is one-dimensional, right? That it's all about your job. But it sounds like what you gained from having so many of these layoff experiences is is a much kind of richer sense of who you are and who you can be in the world versus I'm just a marketer or I am my job, right?
Right. I went to a funeral of a friend of mine who passed away unexpectedly in an accident about a year and a half ago. And I remember being just like wholly blown away at the number of people. There were people outside this church. They were like in the parking lot. They had to wheel out a screen so that people could see what was happening on the inside. And every single person who spoke at his service told stories about him that had absolutely nothing to do with his work, with his career. By the way, he was enormously successful in his career. No one spoke about that. No one spoke about the size of his 401k. No one spoke about his financial situation. Everyone spoke about the depth and breadth of this man's soul and his personality. And I remember leaving that service and thinking, I hope that if I get into an accident, that is the type of funeral that I have. I think the exercise I went through that I took on myself to make a list of all the things that I wanted to say that I was, and at the bottom of that list was what I did for a living, pairs with that idea of like, what do you really want people to talk about when you're gone?
I love that perspective. And I'm reading a book actually right now that encourages people to take that perspective of if you were writing your own eulogy, right? Like, what would you want that to say? Who do I want to be in the world? What do I want to be known for? I want to talk about a question that has bubbled to the surface in Udemy's research over the past few months. We know that 48% of Americans working today experience what's known as layoff anxiety. And so it's probably not surprising that our researchers found one big question that's really on everybody's mind. And that is, how do I layoff proof my job? So I'm wondering, how do you think about the response to a question like this?
My answer to that would be, you don't have control. Just hard stop. You just don't. You don't get to predict what kind of financing a company is going to get. You don't get to predict what a CEO's 5-year exit strategy is going to be, who they're talking to in terms of acquiring other companies. You have no control over the spreadsheet, because at the end of the day, this is never personal. It is a spreadsheet. It is someone sorting by salary and tenure and title and trying to figure out where they can make cuts. It has never been about you or your performance or how smart or intelligent you are. And accepting that is going to be your best benefit. There is another way of interpreting that question, which is, what can I do to expand my skill set and my horizons so that if I am laid off, it will be a short window of time to get to my next place. And that is incredibly within your control. So things like education, learning new technology, brushing up on new skills, reading different types of books, taking different types of classes. It will not lay off proof your job in that you have now, but it will minimize the amount of time that it takes you to find your next place in what that is and what that looks like for you.
You know, I want to point out also that this kind of lack of control and the uncertainty has two sides of it. Obviously, on one side is the potential negative, right? Of it's scary if you get laid off, you weren't expecting it, you don't know what to do. But then on the flip side, the fact that our lives are uncertain, constantly changing, you don't know what to expect, can be a really great thing. You know, I'm also curious, your role, of course, as Udemy's SEO director, right, and guru kind of gives you this unique perspective into other big collective questions that people are asking about layoffs that are kind of floating in the ether. And you found us what is the most Googled question about layoffs. The question is, how do I build a life after a layoff? And we've kind of been talking a little bit about that, but how would you respond to that question?
I think there's a couple of big buckets of things that I think can make this transition period easier from a stress level and sort of mental health perspective. The first one is, I think leaning into your community is just so critical. So making sure that you're staying in touch with the other people who were laid off. There was a particular company that I worked for, and one of the girls that was laid off from that was their VP of PR. And she and I did hiking Wednesdays. And every Wednesday morning, without fail, we were up early, 6:30 in the morning to go on a hike. And we would just talk about the job search and about the job hunting and how difficult it was, because they are in the same boat that you are. And so making sure that you're not isolating, right? And then your other community, your community community that isn't currently laid off and is working, but leaning in and letting them help you. Like, let people buy you drinks because you don't have the money and you want to go out, or let people front you a t-shirt at a concert, right? And because those things tend to be circular and they can help you. Or apologize profusely for how many times you've been talking about the number of resumes that you have been sending out because that's all you have going on in your days. Like, they will understand and leaning into them and give them support. So I think the community building aspect of this is just really, really important to helping survive that. I think structure to your days is the next biggest thing, and it's the most difficult, right? I give myself 2 weeks to feel incredibly sorry for myself. Like, no holds barred, like sleep in until all hours of the day, don't get out of your pajamas until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, like sit around and binge watch television shows, like feel sorry for myself, but I cut it off at a certain point. And then after that, you're up at the same time every single day and work in the flex things you want to do. So get up every day, spend 3 hours looking for a job, have lunch at a specific time of the day, go to the gym at a specific time of the day, take a nap. I called them Oprah naps because she used to be on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, I'm down for a nap every single afternoon. It makes me feel good, but I did it consistently and created structure. So adding structure to your calendar is just incredibly helpful, even if your structure is doing nothing or taking a nap, because when you spin around and float is when really bad thoughts start to come into the picture. And then lastly, I would say you cannot look for a job for 8 hours a day. It's impossible. So knock off the things that you need to do. Usually your unemployment office is going to dictate how many resumes you have to send out per day. So meet your minimum requirement, check the box, send out a couple of networking emails letting people know, schedule the time that you have it, and then do something constructive with the rest of your time. Like, the public library is like your best friend, right? Because it's free and there's all kinds of stuff going on in there. So like, one time I went on like a 3-month binge watching of checking out every single Marilyn Monroe movie that she ever made because I felt like I should know this, like culturally significant, right? So I checked them all out of the library and I just binge watched Marilyn Monroe movies to be like, what's the big deal with Marilyn Monroe? Like, now I understand it. So, I mean, just adding little mini tasks to your day of things to do. And then my fourth piece of advice would be to leverage the things that you get to do because you aren't currently working. So my big favorite was like 2 p.m. yoga classes, because seriously, who has the bandwidth to go to a 2 o'clock yoga class? Like, pretty much no one, but you do when you're not working. And I was always amazed. I'm like, who are you people? Are you also not working? Do you just work nights? Go hiking on the weekdays, or go outside and join a running club, or go to the park at 1 and read a book in the sunlight, like doing something that you get to do because you are not sitting behind a desk for 8 hours a day. That is how you also win this game from a mental health perspective, because you get to do these things now.
I want to double underline a few things that you said. One, the community piece, I think is so important. And in my own reporting for my book, How to Fall in Love with Questions, one of the things that came up over and over again was the importance of finding community when we're in these times of uncertainty and transition in our lives, and we don't have the answer, right? You don't know what's going to happen next, but the best thing that you can do in those moments is to find people that are also going through that uncertainty. So you can really kind of support each other and kind of get through it together. So I think that's so important. I want to get to a few listener questions, and we're going to make these rapid fire questions because we do have a bunch of people that were curious about your experience. So the first question comes from Lisa, who was recently laid off. And she asks something similar to what we were just talking about, but she asks, how do I combat the isolation that comes with a layoff? And then I think maybe the part we might want to focus on here is, my friends have lives that are moving forward and mine feels stuck. So how would you respond to that feeling of stuckness?
Yeah, that's the big elephant in the room, is that you feel stuck every single week that you are not working. For as much as I am an advocate of like starting a little side hustle or doing something that you have the privilege of doing because you are not working at this moment, because you are privileged in that way, for some reason it translates into, I'm just not moving forward. In theory, things that you're doing to help yourself should feel like like you're moving forward, but it doesn't feel that way for some reason. And I'm not entirely sure why that's true, but it is very, very real. And it is the number one problem, particularly if you find yourself unemployed for an extended period of time, like everyone else is traveling and you are stuck. And I would say that the best way to combat that is to be outside doing something that is helping you earn money. So there was a certain point in time, this was like pre-eBay, where I was like walking this used bookstore district in Denver and buying little paperback books and then flipping them online on a website called half.com, right? And they just gave me enough to do. It made me walk to the bookstores. It made me buy shipping materials and then walk to the post office, and it filled up my whole afternoon, and I was making a tiny bit of money. I took a part-time job at a ski expo, like shoving price tags into hats and like hanging them up. Just horrible, monotonous work. But it gave me community. It gave me a schedule. It gave me a little bit of money coming in to supplement my unemployment. And so I feel like if you can find things that will earn you a smidgen of money, you start to combat that feeling of being stuck.
Well, and I think it's probably not helped by the fact that so many of us are applying to jobs through, sites like LinkedIn, right? And you can see all of that comparison kind of right in your face.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to be in those networks in order to be seeing what job opportunities there are. But on the flip side, you have that painful psychological experience of feeling stuck and comparing yourself. I want to go to another question here, which is from Lauren, who was laid off a few months ago. And Lauren asks, I feel like my job was my purpose and now I feel untethered. How do I deal with my emotions every day? And what strikes me about this question too is we talk a lot about this idea of finding your purpose and identifying your values on the show. And I think there are a couple of schools of thoughts here, right? Some people believe it's really important to find that one true purpose. And other people think that idea that any of us have a single kind of grand purpose is actually just a myth, and that purpose is really something that evolves and changes over the course of your life. So I'm curious, how you've thought about purpose as you've navigated layoffs, and also how you would recommend to Lauren how she would deal with her emotions around that.
I think purpose, to me, having lived this sort of career that I've had, is defined by everything that's at the top of that list. I personally, for my own sanity, will never tell you that my purpose is my work. It just isn't. My purpose is being a good human and loving the people that are in my community and adding value and giving back to the world that I live in, and feeling like the balance of my contribution and my mark in the world is about all the things on that list, and none of them are going to be my job. And that mindset for me also allows me the flexibility to take the curves in the road that are offered to me, right? So that story that I told about sending out that email, deciding I was going to blow my severance, being a ski bum in Vail for a winter, only to get derailed because someone pointed out to me, literally the comment was, well, the snow's not actually following yet. So are you interested in this work? And I was like, well, okay, fine. And then that led to another, which led to another. And then all of a sudden I never went to Vail. I never was a ski bum. I was suddenly self-employed and working through a difficult time in the economy, and I was doing very well for myself. So if I don't define myself or my purpose as my work, and instead just say that I'm very happy that I do something that I really enjoy, it also opens up paying attention to all those little curvy little things that the universe would just drop into your lap. So that emotional component to this, I'm a big proponent of acknowledging it and being like, yeah, I'm in a crap mood today. I used to have this spreadsheet that tracked how many resumes, and you're like, I'm at 120, I'm at 200 resumes, and no one's hiring me, and I can't get interviews. And you see everyone on your LinkedIn feed being like, congratulations, I just started a new gig. And you're like, what's wrong with me? And this is an impossible task to address. And I think the feelings are just very, very real. And I can't stress enough the power of leaving your house and trying to find a schedule and routine to literally go touch grass, like go to the park with a book and read and sun yourself and be like, look how tan I am because I get to go to the pool at 2:00 in the afternoon or the park. Like, I think that there are ways to navigate that. And my advice to her would also be to just get offline so that you can, make a list of the things that you would have always dreamt about doing if you won the Powerball. Like, I have a Powerball list that I keep, and I go back in there when I get laid off and tick off things like, I'm going to do this now, right? So that's the best way to combat that, because that adds positive things into your world and you're not just swimming in your own feelings.
I think that's so important. And I think one of the things that you said jumps out at me in particular, which is to not force yourself to feel a particular way, right? So if you are having a day where you're feeling really demotivated, to just be with that, and that's okay. And also to know that, hey, I might be feeling this way, and it's probably going to make me feel a little bit better if I take a walk outside, or if I, get some fresh air and I'm not sitting on my laptop all day, kind of stewing about this. And even to kind of bring it back to what we were talking about before, to get involved with groups of people who are facing similar things, right? Or to find those communities that can kind of help you through those challenging moments, because otherwise it can be a very lonely, isolating experience. But the tagline for our show is Shift Happens. And I am wondering if you could share, what do you do when shift happens at work?
Yeah, I think it's sort of just this generalized process of like, whatever feeling comes with that. If it's overwhelmed, if it's, I feel like this is unfair, if it is some sort of corporate pivot in goals and you're trying to adjust to that, I feel like there's a amount of time that I give myself to be super emotional about it offline, like not with my coworkers, and then regroup and figure out what it is that I want to get from this situation, and then put a plan in place to get to that place. So I think if I can knock out the emotional components of it, if I give myself enough space to knock that out, I can just regroup and focus. But if I attempt to regroup and focus right away, the emotions just start to build and build and build and build. So I'm a big proponent of like, take a couple hours, have all the feelings, and then sit back down and figure out the best approach.
So this wasn't something from a listener or from Google, but it is something that I'm really curious about. And what would you say is the best part of a layoff?
When I got to the place where I started to understand the benefit of a layoff is having the time and flexibility to do things I wouldn't otherwise do, that is the number one benefit. And you're somewhat angled around that because you're financially concerned, right? So looking for things that are free, that are low cost, that you get to do because you have this space when the rest of the world does not have this space. And making that list of all the possibilities allows you to start to slightly feel like you are in a privileged space. And then my last comment to that would be the best part of a layoff is sleep. I had a family member one time, like, I don't know what layoff this was, like 6 or 7, who called me, and he was my cousin, and he said, "What are you doing?" He called it like 4:00 in the afternoon. I was in my Oprah nap and I woke up to answer his call. And I was like, I was napping. And he's like, "Oh, you're so lucky. Like, just think of how great your skin is going to be when you're 65 because you had all these blocks of sleep in your life." And I'm like, yes, that is a benefit of all my layoffs.
I love that. That is great. And I'm also going to start thinking about Oprah naps. So this is a great thing to have in my back pocket. Well, Krista, I so appreciate you coming on. Thank you for sharing your playbook with us, all of your wisdom from surviving 11 layoffs. And it was such a joy to get to chat with you.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for this episode of Leading Up, the Work Shift. What career questions would you like answered in future episodes? Let us know. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we might just read your review on the show. Follow Leading Up, the Work Shift on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. This podcast is produced by Udemy in partnership with Pod People. Until next time, keep leading up.